Awesome, thank you. So just quick point of data. I'm actually Curtis Hendrick, not Jamie. Jamie couldn't be here today. We're good, we're good. All right. But Gary is able to join us. And so we're actually going to mix up our format a little bit. I had planned on kind of walking you through presenting on behalf of the customer. But with the customer here, I thought it would actually probably be more helpful and more impactful to kind of hear their story and hear their journey a little bit. Let's see, where's the slides? There it is. So we're going to talk a little bit about their journey, a little bit where they started, some of the challenges that they faced, but ultimately what they were able to achieve with bringing Epic alternate production and now production, which we'll hear a little bit more as well, into AWS. So just as a means of introduction, who the customer is. So Baptist Memorial is actually the 30th largest health system in the United States. They have 24 hospitals across 3 different states, 3,800 licensed beds, over 190 ambulatory clinics, and over 4,000 providers, including their affiliated providers. They are also a Community Connect provider to organizations within their region, and they do have an academic component around nursing, radiology, and medical school. So with that, Gary, you want to do a quick introduction of yourself?
Sure. My name is Gary Wiener. I am the acting CTO at Baptist. I've been there for 2.5 years, and I've helped them plan the strategy for our migration to the AWS cloud, as well as improve their infrastructure, which we'll talk about in a few moments.
Awesome. Thank you. So you started there about 2.5 years ago. Maybe give us a little bit of the lay of the land. What was the current state about 2.5 years ago?
So about 3.5 years ago, a new CIO came in. A year into his, or about 4 years ago, he came in about a year into his tenure. 3 directors left within about a 60-day period. He then reached out to Optimum Healthcare IT and requested some help. And through that, they brought me in as the interim CTO. And the plan was to be there for about 90 to 180 days to help them start planning some strategy and architectural planning. While we were there and we did an evaluation, it was determined that they were between $30 and $50 million in technical debt, where they had a lot of old infrastructure that needed to be replaced, and they had limited data disaster recovery capabilities. So between those 2 things, there was a lot of work that needed to be done, and we need to figure out how to get it done quickly. My stay there extended beyond the 90 to 180 days I was planning to be there to now it's 2.5 years as we've been doing the transformation. And I think one of the key things that we've been able to figure out is how to take legacy spend and modernize their infrastructure without increasing their spend by reinvesting that and reducing it and doing it gracefully over that past 2.5 year period.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. Sure. Everyone's wondering right now, what is my total number of technical debt that I have in my environment, right? But so question for you then, part of the early stages of looking at the assessment, looking at what that plan was, kind of early on, we identified cloud as an important component of that. So maybe talk a little bit about how cloud became kind of an essential component of the overall transformation that you're executing.
So cloud was an early decision from a disaster recovery perspective of how can we shore up our disaster recovery, and let's move Epic first into the cloud from a DR perspective, because if we had a major failure, there were some weaknesses in their DR strategy to making sure that we can keep the organization up and running. With the fact that there was so much technical debt, we need to do it from a speed to value perspective very rapidly. To give you an example, we needed to upgrade our Epic environment that was in production. That took us 14 months from the time we began planning, purchasing the hardware, testing, converting, and doing all those functions to go live. The time that it took us to get to the cloud from a DR perspective was less than half that time, which we're going to talk about in a few moments. But the goal was to be more flexible, scalable, and being able to get there quickly. And I think we've produced that and have proven that that's to be successful.
Awesome. So let's go a little bit deeper in terms of Epic, and as probably the most critical workload in your environment, needing to have disaster recovery for that, looking at cloud for that. Obviously, there was a project here to get that done. Maybe give us a little bit of details about what that project involved. What was the timeline? What was the scope? Give us a little bit of details about that.
So when we began, we actually looked at multiple clouds, and we actually tested in multiple clouds to see how we can compare from a performance perspective. Baptist, being the 30 largest healthcare system, had a lot of GREFs that they needed in order to measure performance as it related to Epic. And in the first cloud that we tested it in, it didn't perform at the rate that we needed to. So from the time we said go to start with AWS through the contracting, provisioning, it took us 7 months from beginning to end. And in lessons learned, we could have cut that down by 2 months by doing some things a little bit differently. So some of that was learning curve. So I believe if we had to do other applications now, we can do it in half the time, probably quicker than it would be to identify what you need from an equipment perspective, going through the purchase order processing and procuring it. We can do it that rapidly and just bringing it up into the cloud and rolling it out. So I think that's really one of the key indications why we were going to the cloud. It's about flexibility overall and speed to value.
Awesome. And so obviously a project like this is going to have some challenges. So what were some of the challenges that you guys faced during the duration of the project?
I think there are several different challenges that we faced. Some were technological, some were just human resource capable. One of the things is taking your current staff and helping getting them trained and transition to a new environment. That is probably one of the biggest challenges. And 6, 7 months later, where we are today, there are several people that have grasped onto it and are doing a great job with that transition. So if you're going to do that journey, make sure that you understand where your staff is from a readiness perspective, making sure you have a partner that can help you get through that, that's willing to collaborate with your team, and then bringing your team through that. Technologically, we hit some challenges. One of them really was around some what I'll call technology debt or legacy technology, in which from a networking perspective, we had some network design that we knew needed to be modified, but we didn't realize how impactful that would be. And that slowed us down by a good 30 days as we were changing some of the routing infrastructure to make sure that this worked effectively everywhere. A third area that was surprising that slowed us down by about 3 weeks is that the staff was measuring things as if it was on-prem, and things work differently in the cloud. So we need to make sure that as you make that transition, you understand the difference between how things should run effectively in the cloud versus that on-prem. And once we got through that, I think things worked very effective.
Awesome. So let's talk a little bit about outcomes then, right? So what were some of the end results that you guys have experienced since completing this project?
So there's several things that I think we experienced that are improvements over where we were previously. But I think the first thing that we realized is once we got production running up in the cloud, that performance was better than what it was on-prem. We were seeing a 20% performance improvement and a 60% improvement in the
Exception rates
overall. So that was pretty phenomenal overall. Additionally, we were able to one of the things that we're able to do is to so we saw improvements in performance and exception rates. In addition, we were able to be more flexible. So one of the things that we need to do as we look forward is we acquired a new organization, and there needed to be purchasing of more equipment in the data center in order to accommodate that from a presentation layer perspective. Instead of going out and buying that new equipment, we have figured out how to make our cloud journey run from a hybrid perspective, where we'll have some of the presentation layer running on-prem, some running in the cloud, so we can burst into the cloud as we need additional capacity, eliminating the need to acquire more servers from a capacity perspective. That, to me, was one of the most amazing things we were able to accomplish. Additionally, we were able to test that from inception to implementation and production in less than 2 months. I'm sorry, 2 weeks. So we were able to turn that around in 2 weeks. Finally, after we went ahead and did our second test run in production in the cloud, we decided to leave part of the Epic environment running in the cloud permanently. From a cost perspective, it wasn't that much greater, and we were seeing greater in performance. So I think the cloud delivered more than we expected in a quicker time, and the ability to really run it hybrid was greater than what we anticipated, and it's actually helping us solve some other challenges that we face much quicker than what we could have if we had to do it on-prem.
So maybe talk a little bit about, so the first time you guys tested it, right, you went live for 1 day, like on a Saturday. And then later, a few months later, you went live for a week, and then you've stayed there.
Yeah. So as I alluded, we're testing both the hybrid approach to it. Our first test run was for a weekend where we brought it up and launched it, and really it was to learn about lessons learned. We kind of compared it to analogous to, the space shuttle taking off on its first flight. The goal was just to get it up there, keep it up there for a little bit, and bring it back down. It did. We were successful, and it worked well, and we learned a lot. A lot of good lessons learned came out of that. We waited about another 2 months, and our plan was to launch it again for a week. So we got it up there running for a week, and after the first week, we said, let's leave it there for a second week because it was going so well. At the end of the second week, I was sitting in a meeting with the CIO and the senior director of IT Ops, and he said, okay, we've been up there for 2 weeks. When do we want to bring it back? And Jamie and I both looked at him and said, why bring it back? Let's leave it up there. And he said, okay. And he said, why? And I said, well, one, it's performing better. And two, we're learning a lot. And of course, what's the first thing that comes out of the CIO's mouth is, what's the cost? And I said, that's a great question. I said, we've done some calculations, and if we were to bring back just the presentation layer, which we're using Citrix for, and run that on-prem and run the back end in the cloud, it won't cost us much more than it will just to keep the DR environment up there and running. And then will you keep DR on-prem and just flip it? I said, additionally, we'll be able to learn more. What we'll be able to learn is, can we run this from a hybrid perspective? It'll keep us from having to purchase some new servers as we bring on the new entity. And we'll learn about latency and performance. And if it doesn't work, we'll bring everything back in. That was about 3 weeks ago. And it has worked beyond our expectations. And we're at the decision point. Do we leave it in there for the remainder of the current fiscal year? And I think that's what we're going to do with it. The final decision hasn't been made. His plan, though, was that next fiscal year, we're going to leave Epic up there running from a production perspective and use on-prem as a DR. So I think we're ahead of schedule, and that's only been enabled by the flexibility that we're able to have from a hybrid perspective from running the cloud, both on-prem and obviously in the AWS instance.
So one of the things that happened at Baptist was some of just the staff, their mental shift as they moved to cloud, right? And so people that are used to living in the data center world, used to the procurement times and the lack of agility and things like that. How has that changed? How have you seen kind of the headspace change with the staff when it comes to the new world that they have available to them?
Yeah, I think it's been pretty phenomenal. We've had several people go out and get AWS certified, and they're working real hard at it. I think a greater example is when we made the decision about 3-4 weeks ago to say, let's leave it in the cloud and bring the presentation layer down. I made one phone call to one person and said, what do you think about this idea? Let's set up a call tomorrow, bring some people together and have a conversation. And that person gave me 15 reasons why we shouldn't do it. And I'm like, oh, so I'm thinking to myself, wow, there's a lot of resistance to this. I'm not sure we'll be able to pull this off. The next day, we get on the call, and I was expecting the group of people to tell me all the reasons why it was a stupid idea. But instead, they actually got together after my first phone call and came up with how we can do it. And instead of them telling me why we can't do it, they told me how we can do it and how they wanted to try it and what the interesting outcomes they'd see from it. So from a team of individuals less than a year ago who knew nothing about the cloud and was resistant to it, were actually helping us come up with solutions that will be better for the organization and more flexible and actually save us money. And I think that shift alone was amazing. And after that call, I went back to the CIO and said, we just saw a culture shift occur here. And the culture shift was pretty amazing. And I explained it to him, and he thought that was fantastic. So I think it was very, very successful.
Awesome. So we know from the data that 50% of the people that say they're going to go first into the cloud or go into the cloud, cost is a big component of that. So maybe talk a little bit about your kind of holistic view in terms of cost and how that kind of helped drive. You don't have to give facts or figures, but maybe how the approach there kind of led you into the path that you ended up on.
Yeah, so one of the things that we looked at is that we had that large technology debt that existed, and we knew we had a large spend that was coming. Additionally, we had a large operating expense that occurred to maintain the current environments. And we all know that there are several vendors that are out there that are increasing their costs exponentially and are challenging us as things go forward from a cost perspective. So what we've been able to do is take a look at what the current expenditures are and how do we take those and how do we align those with some of our current contracts and renewals to reduce the spend that is actually being shifted to fund the journey. And we've been able to do a lot of the stuff that we're doing in the cloud by reinvesting what we're currently spending on legacy technology and investing into new modernized technology. And I think that's been one of the things that's enabled us to do this, because we're not going back to the organization saying we need more money to run in the cloud. We're looking at it, how do we reinvest what we're currently spending to run in the cloud? And that's a tight rope to walk, but I think we've done that very successfully. And along the way, you take a few risks, but between storage and storage maintenance, storage repurchase, servers maintenance, server repurchases, between other underlying software that you're running, it becomes a very compelling case to get there. Additionally, as you transition the staff, there's also a different staff mix that you need, and you may be able to reduce some staff over time through attrition.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I think so. Anybody that maybe is watching or listening and are curious, kind of advice that you maybe have for them if they're about to undertake a journey like this, if they're about to go forward and press forward in a cloud-first strategy.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that I would recommend. One is making sure that you prepare your staff appropriately for the journey, making them understand that they're not going to lose their jobs, but if they go on that journey, they'll transition well to it, and that would be successful. I think the second thing that you need to do is really understand what your infrastructure costs are and understand how do you align that and how do you align that from a savings perspective to help fund the journey and do that overall, because that's something that can be done and can be done successfully. I think the third thing that's important is making sure you select the appropriate partner, both from a cloud perspective, and I would suggest that you bring in a seasoned partner in making that migration happen, because they'll help not only making sure it's successful, but they're also there to help mentor your staff through the changes. And if you have the right partner to do that, that's something that can be very, very successful.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. Well, I think this was great hearing your real lived experiences during the journey. I think that kind of covered all the items that we wanted to hit on for this presentation today. So we appreciate you guys coming, and we appreciate Gary sharing all of his experiences with us over the last really couple of years.